My son-in-law had no idea I owned the very shipyard where his family's luxury yachts were built. To him, I was just a broke old widow in a department store dress that didn't fit the aesthetic of his high society wedding. He thought he could humiliate me by seating me at table 42 right next to the kitchen doors and mocking my humble roots in front of 500 elite guests. But 5 minutes after I walked up to that microphone, his empire started to crumble and the room went dead silent. My name is Margaret Miller. I'm 59 years old, and I learned something vital that night. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one everyone else thinks is invisible. You see, people look at a woman in work boots and assume she has a small life. They see the grease under my fingernails and assume my mind is as simple as the steel I weld. They couldn't have been more wrong. The chairman, Julian Sterling, and his son, Julian Jr., thought they had me figured out. Poor old Margaret living in that drafty, salt-stained house near the docks of Maine, driving a 15-year-old station wagon that rumbles like a freight train. They saw me working double shifts as a foreman at the Miller shipyards and felt a mixture of pity and disgust. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that while I was coming home with aching bones to put my daughter Sarah through the most expensive Ivy League schools, I was also the majority shareholder of the Sterling's own investment firm. Let's go back 30 years, when the chairman's father was running Sterling Global into the ground through reckless gambling and a series of scandalous business deals. The company was weeks away from a total collapse. I was 29 at the time, a young widow who had just lost her husband to a shipyard accident. I had his life insurance payout and every single penny I'd saved since I was 16 years old. I saw an opportunity that others were too afraid to take. I didn't buy jewelry. I didn't buy a new house. I bought 51% of Sterling Global through an anonymous shell company named M. Miller Holdings. I became the silent ghost in their machine. Today, that investment is worth about $700 million. But I never told Sarah. My late husband and I made a pact. Our daughter would grow up with grit, not a trust fund. We wanted her to value the sweat of her brow, not the weight of a platinum card. Maybe that was my greatest mistake, because without the perspective of struggle, Sarah grew up enamored by the glow of old money. She ended up marrying Julian Jr. without ever realizing that her poor mother was actually the one signing the dividends that paid for his $10,000 Italian suits and his $200,000 sports cars. The tension started months before the wedding. I remember a lunch we had at a cold, white tablecloth restaurant in the city. Sarah looked at me, her eyes darting nervously around the room every time a socialite walked by. She reached across the table and touched my hand, a hand that still bore a faint scar from a welding spark. "Mom," she whispered, her voice tight and rehearsed, "Julian Jr. wants the wedding to be a certain way. His family is very established, very old world. He thought it would be better if you just enjoyed the meal as a guest. His father, the chairman, is a professional public speaker. He's going to handle the toasts. We just don't want you to feel the pressure of having to speak in front of people who, well, you know." "People who what, Sarah?" I asked, my voice calm but my heart beginning to turn to lead. "People who might not understand your background," she finished, looking away. I felt the sting, sharp and hot, but I faced tougher things than a snub from a silver spoon executive. I had faced freezing winters on the docks and union strikes that lasted months. "That's fine, honey," I said, but I knew it was a setup. I'd been hearing whispers through my lawyer, Arthur Vance. Julian Jr. was in trouble. He had leveraged the family firm's entire portfolio to build a massive riverfront plaza project. It was a billion-dollar dream, but it was missing one piece, a specific strip of industrial land required for deep water access. That land belonged to my shipyard. He'd been cursing that stubborn old dock worker who won't sell in his board meetings for months. He just didn't realize that stubborn old dock worker was the woman who had tucked his wife into bed and kissed her forehead for 20 years. The wedding night arrived like a grand performance. It was held at the Sterling estate, a fortress of white roses, crystal chandeliers, and a level of pretension that made the air feel thin. I wore a simple cream dress, the nicest thing I owned that didn't smell like sea salt or diesel. When I arrived at the grand entrance, an usher in a stiff tuxedo looked at my invitation, then at my faded purse and sneered. "Table 42, ma'am," through the double doors, all the way to the back near the service hall. I was seated at the very edge of the room. Every 5 seconds, the kitchen doors would swing open, hitting my chair and bringing with it the smell of garbage and the shouting of chefs. I was miles away from the raised dais where my daughter sat in a $20,000 lace gown. She looked like a stranger to me, a polished porcelain doll designed to fit into a world of hollow glass. Julian's mother, Beatrice, sat at the head table, draped in pearls that probably cost more than my house. She didn't even look in my direction. When our eyes accidentally met earlier that day, she had looked through me as if I were a pane of dirty glass. Finally, the dinner plates were cleared, and Chairman Julian Sterling stood up for the keynote toast. He was a tall man with silver hair and a voice that commanded the room like a king. He started talking about lineage, legacy, and refinement of the Sterling name. Then he turned his predatory eyes toward the back of the room, toward table 42. "We are so happy to welcome Sarah into our fold," he boomed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "It is truly a testament to the American dream that a girl from the, shall we say, grime of the shipyard docks can be upgraded to a life of true class and excellence. We are more than happy to provide the polish and the social standing that her upbringing so clearly lacked." The room erupted in polite, snickering laughter. The socialites at the front tables turned to me, their eyes filled with pitying amusement. I looked at Sarah. My heart broke, not because of the chairman's words, but because of her reaction. She didn't stand up. She didn't look angry. She just looked down at her plate, nodding slightly, looking relieved that the embarrassment of her mother was being safely mocked from a distance. That was the moment I realized my daughter hadn't just married into their family. She had adopted their cruelty. She had traded her mother's love for a seat at a table that would never truly accept her. I stood up. I didn't have a tuxedo, and my shoes weren't designer, but I walked toward that stage with the weight of 30 years of hard work in my step. The laughter died down as I approached. The ushers tried to block me, but I looked them in the eye with the authority of a woman who had commanded 500 men on a shipyard floor. They stepped aside. I walked up onto the dais, reached out and took the microphone right out of the chairman's hand. The silence was deafening. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I wasn't invited to speak tonight because apparently my grime doesn't mix well with your polish. But since the chairman is so concerned about upgrades and lineage, I think it's time we discussed the true cost of this wedding. Julian Jr. laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Margaret, please, go back to your table. You've had too much champagne. Someone get her a taxi." "I haven't had a drop, Julian," I said, looking him dead in the eye. I pulled out my phone and hit a number I knew by heart. I pressed the speaker button and held it to the mic. "Vance here," a voice boomed. "Arthur Vance, one of the most feared corporate lawyers on the East Coast." "Arthur," I said, "I'm at the wedding. I've just been told I'm an inconvenience to the Sterling legacy. Activate Clause 22 of the shareholder agreement. I want an immediate freeze on all Sterling Global assets pending a full forensic audit of the Riverfront project, and prepare the legal documents to remove the current CEO and his board advisors for ethical violations." "Certainly, Certainly, Mrs. Miller, Arthur replied. Shall I also notify the banks that the majority shareholder, the only shareholder that matters, is exercising her right to liquidate the trust on Monday morning? Do it, I said, and ended the call. The chairman's face went from a healthy tan to a ghostly, sickly gray. Beatrice's silver fork hit her china plate with a sharp clink. Mrs. Miller, Julian Jr. whispered, his voice cracking. The M. Miller on the deeds? The one who owns the controlling interest in my father's firm?
That's you? I stood tall, looking every bit the woman who had built an empire from the steel up. 25 years ago, Julian, when your father was about to lose everything to his gambling debts and his incompetence, I was the one who wrote the check that saved his name. I bought 51% of your company when no one else would touch it. I stayed silent because I didn't care about the fame. I cared about the work. I stepped closer to them. The salary you collect, the mansion you're standing in, the very champagne you're drinking tonight to toast your own excellence, it all exists because I allowed it. I am the shipyard, Julian, and I am the firm. I turned to my daughter. Sarah was staring at me, her mouth open, her face a mask of dawning horror. Sarah, you told me I was an inconvenience because I work with my hands. You thought I'd ruin your reputation in this room of ghosts. You sat there while they insulted the woman who bled for your tuition. I turned back to the chairman. And you? You thought I was lucky to have my daughter upgraded by your family. Well, here's the update. Your company is effectively bankrupt as of 9 a.m. Monday morning. I'm pulling the funding, and that piece of land you need for your riverfront project, the one you've been calling me a stubborn old fool over, I've decided to turn it into a public park for the shipyard workers you think are beneath you. Julian Jr. collapsed into his chair. He looked like a balloon that had just lost all its air. The guests were staring at their plates, the snickering replaced by a heavy, suffocating shame. Margaret, please, the chairman stammered, reaching for my arm. The project, it's for the family. It's for the future. No, I said quietly. It was for your ego, and you were willing to sacrifice your wife's mother to feed it. I walked off that stage and didn't look back. Sarah followed me into the lobby, her heavy lace train rustling on the marble floor. She was crying, calling my name. Mom, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I was just trying to fit in. I didn't mean those things. I stopped at the heavy oak doors and looked at my daughter, the girl I had sacrificed my youth, my comfort, and my health for. Sarah, you didn't just try to fit in. You chose them. You sat there and smiled while they spat on my life's work. You wanted a billionaire's life? Well, you've got it, just without the billions. Good luck with the mortgage. The next 6 months were a reckoning for the Sterling family. Without my 51% backing, the banks moved in like sharks. The riverfront project collapsed, leaving a skeletal ruin of steel by the water. The chairman was forced into a shameful early retirement under a cloud of debt and investigation. Julian Jr. found out very quickly that prestige doesn't pay the bills when your credit cards are declined at the grocery store. Sarah called me 100 times. She told me she had left Julian. She told me she was working a real job now. But some bridges, once burned, leave too much ash to cross. I sent her enough money to stay on her feet, but I didn't give her a seat at my table. She had to earn that for herself. As for me, I'm back at the shipyard. I still wear my work boots and I still have grease under my nails. But now when I walk into a room, nobody looks through me. They know that the woman in the faded navy coat owns the very air they breathe. I'm living in Tuscany now, in a villa overlooking my own vineyard. My hands are still calloused, but now it's from tending the earth, not welding steel. And for the first time in 30 years, I'm not sitting at the back of the room near the kitchen. I'm at the head of my own table. The greatest inheritance you can leave your children isn't a bank account. It's the wisdom to know that the person scrubbing the floor today might just be the person who owns the building tomorrow. Always be careful whose dignity you try to trade for an upgrade, because you might find out the price is is more than you can ever afford to pay. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to show someone your true worth when they thought you were nothing, tell me about it in the comments. Remember, you are the architect of your own story. Don't let anyone else hold the pen. I'll see you in the next one.